The bass from the speakers vibrated through my chest like a second heartbeat as I stood outside Maverick's bar, my hand trembling against the cold metal of the door handle. Through the frosted glass, I could see the warm amber glow of Edison bulbs casting long shadows across exposed brick walls, hear the muffled laughter of Friday night crowds trying to forget their week. The air smelled like rain-soaked asphalt, and the sweet, yeasty scent of craft beer drifting from the ventilation system above my head. I shouldn't have come here. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to turn around, to go home to my studio apartment in Astoria, to pour myself a glass of cheap wine and pretend tonight wasn't the anniversary of the second time Trevor broke my heart. But my feet stayed planted on the rain-slick sidewalk, my fingers tightening around the strap of my worn leather purse, the one my Nana had given me before she passed, the one that still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume when I pressed it close. It had been 8 months since I'd walked away from Trevor Ashford, 8 months since I'd found him tangled in my sheets with Harper, my supposed best friend since college. The first time had been a year before that, a drunken mistake he swore would never happen again. I'd believed him because I was stupid, because I thought 5 years together meant something, because my Italian family had already started planning our wedding in their heads, and I couldn't bear to disappoint them. Camilla, amore mio, when a man shows you who he is, you believe him, my mother had said in her thick Sicilian accent when I finally told her about the second betrayal. Her hands had been covered in flour from making pasta, and she'd wiped them on her apron before cupping my face with a tenderness that made me want to cry. You are Barisi. We don't beg for scraps. But here I was, standing outside the bar where mutual friends had told me Trevor would be celebrating some promotion, probably surrounded by his finance bro buddies, probably with Harper draped over him like the designer coat she'd maxed out her credit card to buy. My reflection in the glass door showed a woman I barely recognized, dark circles under my brown eyes despite the concealer I'd carefully applied, my naturally wavy hair pulled into a sleek ponytail that emphasized the sharp angles of my face I'd inherited from my father's side, the fitted black dress I'd bought specifically for this moment hugging curves I'd lost weight from because stress killed my appetite better than any diet ever could. I pushed the door open. The heat hit me first. Then the smell. Whiskey, perfume, the sharp tang of lime from the bar where a bartender with sleeve tattoos was muddling mojitos. The crowd was typical Manhattan weekend fare, 20-somethings in carefully curated casual outfits that cost more than my monthly MetroCard pass, laughing too loud, drinking too fast, performing happiness for each other's Instagram stories. And there he was. Trevor sat in a circular booth near the back, his sandy blonde hair perfectly styled in that effortless way that actually took him 20 minutes and 3 different products every morning. He wore a navy button-down that I knew cost $200 because I'd been with him when he bought it, back when I still believed we had a future. His arm was slung casually over the shoulders of a redhead I didn't recognize, and he was mid-laugh at something one of his friends had said, his head thrown back in that performative way he had, showing off the expensive dental work his parents had paid for. Harper sat across from him, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves over a sequined top that caught the light every time she moved. She looked happy. They both did. Like I had never existed. Like the 5 years of my life I'd given Trevor were just a blip, easily forgotten, easily replaced. The anger that flooded through me was hot and sharp, tasting like copper on my tongue. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head, mixing Italian and English the way she always had. Il diavolo fa le pentole ma non I coperchi. The devil makes the pots but not the lids. Eventually everything is revealed. I scanned the room, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. I needed to do something, anything, to make Trevor feel even a fraction of what he'd done to me. To show him I wasn't the pathetic girl who'd taken him back the first time, who'd cried on her bathroom floor the second time, who'd spent months rebuilding herself from the ruins he'd left. That's when I saw him. He sat alone at the far end of the bar, a tumbler of what looked like vodka in his large hand, and he was completely, utterly out of place. While everyone else in Mavericks was trying too hard to look effortlessly cool, this man simply existed in a space that seemed to bend around him. He was massive, easily 6'4", with shoulders so broad they strained against the expensive black shirt he wore untucked over dark jeans. His hair was dark, almost black, cut short on the sides with slightly more length on top, styled back in that classic way that suggested Eastern European heritage. His face was all sharp angles and hard edges, a strong jaw covered in carefully maintained stubble, a nose that looked like it had been broken at least once, and eyes. Even from across the room, I could see they were a pale, striking gray, like storm clouds over the Atlantic. He looked Russian, definitely Russian. Everything about him screamed it, the way he held himself with absolute certainty of his own power, the expensive watch on his wrist that caught the light when he lifted his glass, the aura of danger that surrounded him like cologne. He was probably a businessman, maybe involved in something legitimate, maybe not. I didn't care. I just needed him to help me hurt Trevor. My feet moved before my brain could catch up, carrying me across the sticky floor of the bar, past groups of people who seemed to unconsciously part from me like I was carrying something contagious. The stranger didn't look up as I approached, his attention fixed on his phone, his thumb scrolling with the kind of distracted focus that suggested whatever he was reading wasn't particularly interesting, but was better than engaging with the chaos around him. I stopped directly in front of him, close enough that my knees almost touched his, close enough to smell his cologne, something dark and woodsy with notes of bergamot and leather that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My hands were shaking so badly I had to ball them into fists at my sides. "I need you to kiss me." The words came out steadier than I felt, loud enough to be heard over the music, but not so loud that anyone else would notice. Yet. He looked up slowly, and the full force of those gray eyes hit me like a physical thing. Up close, he was even more intimidating. There was something ancient in his gaze, something that suggested he'd seen and done things that would give most people nightmares. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow, and there was another one along his jawline, barely visible beneath his stubble. His lips, full and surprisingly soft-looking for such a hard face, curved into the barest hint of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Excuse me?" His voice was deep, heavily accented, each word pronounced with the kind of careful precision that suggested English wasn't his first language, but he'd mastered it anyway. There was something almost hypnotic about the way he spoke, a roughness that made my stomach flip despite the terror coursing through my veins. "My ex-boyfriend is here with the girl he cheated on me with, twice." The words tumbled out in a rush, my Italian blood making my hands gesticulate even though I was trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. "He's sitting right over there, probably laughing about what an idiot I was to take him back the first time, and I need him to see that I've moved on, that I don't care, that he didn't break me even though he did. And I know this is insane, and you have every right to tell me to fuck off, but please, please just..." I grabbed the front of his shirt, my fingers curling into the expensive fabric, feeling the solid wall of muscle beneath it. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched me with those unsettling eyes as I pulled myself closer to him. "Kiss me now." For one horrible moment, I thought he would refuse, would push me away or laugh at my desperation. But then his hand, God, his hand was enormous, came up to cup the side of my face with surprising gentleness, his calloused thumb brushing across my cheekbone as his eyes searched mine. Looking for what? I didn't know. Permission, maybe, or proof that I wouldn't regret this in 30 seconds. "You are certain?" he asked, his accent thickening slightly, and I could feel the rumble of his voice through his chest where my hands were still fisted in his shirt. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. His other hand came to rest on my waist, his fingers spanning across my ribcage, and then he pulled me forward with a controlled strength that made my breath catch. The world seemed to narrow to just the two of us, his stormy gray eyes, the slight hitch in his breath, the way his jaw tightened as he lowered his head toward mine, and then he kissed me. It wasn't the tentative, exploratory kiss of strangers. It was claiming, possessive, a kiss that made my knees buckle and my hands release his shirt to grip his shoulders for support. His lips moved against mine with a confidence that suggested he knew exactly what he was doing, exactly how to make me forget my own name, let alone Trevor's. One of his hands slid into my hair, tilting my head back to deepen the kiss, while the other hand on my waist tightened, pulling me even closer until I was practically standing between his legs where he sat on the bar stool. I heard someone gasp nearby, heard the music fade slightly as if someone had turned it down, but I couldn't focus on anything except the taste of vodka on his tongue, the scratch of his stubble against my chin, the way his fingers tightened in my hair, like he was memorizing the texture of it. When he finally pulled back, too soon, somehow both too soon and exactly the right moment, I was breathless, dizzy, my lips tingling from the pressure of his. His gray eyes had darkened to the color of gunmetal, and there was something in them now that hadn't been there before, something that made my heart race for entirely different reasons than my plan to hurt Trevor. "Is he watching?" I whispered, not daring to look away from this stranger who'd just turned my entire world sideways with one kiss. The corner of his mouth lifted in something that might have been amusement. "Everyone is watching, Malaya." The Russian endearment rolled off his tongue like honey, and I finally, allowed myself to glance over my shoulder. Trevor's face was red, his mouth hanging open in shock. Harper looked furious, her perfectly manicured hand clutching Trevor's arm like she was afraid he might get up and do something stupid. The entire booth had gone silent, all of Trevor's finance bros staring at me and the stranger with varying expressions of shock and, on a few faces, what looked distinctly like fear. "Camilla?" Trevor's voice carried across the bar, tight with anger and disbelief. "What the fuck?" The stranger's hand was still on my waist, a warm, solid presence that somehow made me feel brave enough to meet Trevor's gaze head-on. "What?" I called back, my voice steadier than it had any right to be. "Did you think you were the only one who could move on?" Trevor stood up so fast he nearly knocked over the table, and Harper grabbed at him again, her eyes wide. But before he could take more than 2 steps toward us, the stranger stood as well, his height and sheer presence making Trevor stop in his tracks. "There is a problem?" the stranger asked, his voice dangerously soft. And I felt the entire bar seem to hold its breath. Trevor's face had gone from red to pale in the space of a heartbeat, his swagger evaporating like morning fog under the weight of this stranger's attention. I'd seen Trevor face down aggressive clients, competitive colleagues, even my hot-tempered Uncle Marco at family dinners, but the way he was looking at this man, it was pure, instinctive fear. The kind you couldn't fake or rationalize away. "No problem," Trevor said, his voice higher than normal, his hands raised slightly in a gesture of submission that would have been satisfying if I wasn't so confused by the intensity of his reaction. "We're good. She's free to do whatever she wants." The stranger didn't move, didn't acknowledge Trevor's words, just kept his gray eyes locked on him with the kind of predatory stillness that reminded me of the stray cats in my Nana's neighborhood in Queens. The ones who'd gone feral and learned to hunt, to kill when necessary. His hand was still on my waist, fingers spread wide across my ribcage, a brand of possession I should have found offensive, but instead made me feel protected for the first time in months. "Good," the stranger finally said, the single word carrying enough weight to make Trevor actually take a step backward. It would be unfortunate if there was a misunderstanding. Harper had appeared at Trevor's side, her perfectly glossed lips pressed into a thin line, her blue eyes narrowed at me in a way that once upon a time would have hurt, but now just felt empty. "Seriously, Cammy, this is so desperate, even for you." The nickname, the one only she and Trevor used, the one that now tasted like ash in my mouth, made my hands curl into fists. But before I could respond, The stranger spoke again, his accented voice carrying that same dangerous softness. "I would suggest," he said, his gaze shifting to Harper with the kind of assessment that made her actually flinch, "that you learn to speak more carefully about things you do not understand." There was something in his tone that made the threat explicit, even though his words remained technically polite. Harper's face flushed, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, and Trevor grabbed her arm, pulling her back toward their booth with an urgency that would have been comical if my heart wasn't hammering so hard against my ribs. I watched them retreat, watched the way Trevor's friends all avoided eye contact, the way Harper kept glancing over her shoulder with an expression caught between fury and genuine fear. Around us, the normal sounds of the bar were slowly returning, conversations resuming, the bartender calling out drink orders, the bass line of whatever indie rock song was playing thrumming through the floor. "Thank you," I managed to say, finally turning to face the stranger fully now that Trevor and Harper had disappeared back into their booth like scolded children. "I didn't expect... I just wanted him to see..." I was babbling, my usual composure shattered by the adrenaline crash hitting me all at once. My hands were shaking again, worse than before, and I pressed them against my thighs to stop the trembling. The stranger watched me with those unreadable gray eyes, his expression neutral, but his body language somehow suggesting concern. A slight forward lean, the way his hand had shifted from my waist to hover near my elbow, as if he was prepared to catch me if I fell. "You should sit," he said, gesturing to the bar stool he'd been occupying. It wasn't a suggestion. I sat, grateful for the support, and he moved to stand beside me, one hand braced against the bar on my other side, effectively caging me in. At any other time, with any other man, I would have felt trapped. But there was something about the way he positioned himself, protective rather than possessive, a barrier between me and the rest of the bar, that made me feel safer than I had in months. "What is your name?" he asked, and the question was so normal, so mundane after everything that had just happened, that I almost laughed. Camila Barisi. My grandmother's maiden name rolled off my tongue automatically, the one I'd started using again after the second betrayal because I'd wanted nothing that connected me to Trevor's world. "And you are?" Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or calculation. Adrian Markov. The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it, the slight emphasis on his surname, suggested it should. I filed that information away to Google later, when my brain wasn't still fuzzy from that kiss, from the adrenaline, from the surreal nature of the entire situation. "Well, Adrian Markov," I said, forcing my voice to steady. "Thank you for playing along with my insane plan. I promise I'm not usually that..." "Brave?" he interrupted, and there was something in his tone that made the word sound like an accusation and a compliment all at once. "Reckless? Desperate enough to grab a stranger in a bar and demand he kiss you?" All of the above, apparently. I laughed, but it came out shaky, and I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling my heart still racing beneath my palm. Seeing him there, so happy, like I never even mattered. He is an idiot. Adrian's statement was matter of fact, delivered with the same certainty someone might use to comment on the weather. Any man who would betray you deserves what comes to him. The conviction in his words made something warm unfurl in my chest, something dangerous and needy that I immediately tried to shut down. This man didn't know me. He'd kissed me because I'd asked, helped me because... Actually, I wasn't sure why he'd helped me. Maybe he felt sorry for me. Maybe he just enjoyed putting fear into men like Trevor. Maybe he was just that bored on a Friday night. "I should go," I said, starting to slide off the bar stool. "I've already crashed your evening enough, and I'm sure you have better things to..." His hand on my wrist stopped me, his grip gentle but immovable. "You will not leave alone, not while he is still here watching." I glanced over my shoulder to find Trevor indeed staring at us from across the bar, his expression caught between jealousy and something that looked suspiciously like calculation. Harper was whispering urgently in his ear, probably planning their response to my little show, probably already crafting the story they'd tell their mutual friends about how desperate, pathetic Camilla had to stage a public makeout session with a stranger just to try to hurt Trevor. "He's not dangerous," I said, pulling my wrist from Adrian's grasp, even as part of me wanted to leave it there, to let this stranger continue touching me with that surprising gentleness. "He's just an asshole. I can handle—" "You should not have to handle him at all." Adrian's jaw tightened, and I noticed for the first time that there was a small muscle that jumped when he was angry, a tell that suggested he was working to control something much darker beneath his calm exterior. Men like that, they do not learn, they do not change. They only become more bold when they think they can act without consequences. "Speaking from experience?" I asked, then immediately regretted the question when his eyes went flat, cold, all the warmth that had been building there vanishing like it had never existed. "Yes." The single word was final, a door slamming shut. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment, and I became acutely aware of how close he was standing, how his body heat seemed to radiate in the small space between us, how the scent of his cologne, that woodsy, expensive smell, was starting to become familiar in a way that should have bothered me but didn't. The bartender appeared, his sleeve tattoos rippling as he wiped down the bar in front of us, his eyes flicking between Adrian and me with barely concealed curiosity. "Can I get you anything?" he asked, his question directed at me but his attention clearly on Adrian, like he was checking for permission. "Vodka," Adrian said before I could respond. "2. Neat." "I don't really drink," I started, but Adrian was already pulling out his wallet, extracting crisp bills, and laying them on the bar with the kind of casual disregard for money that came from having a lot of it. "Tonight you do," he said, and there was something in his tone that made it clear this wasn't up for debate. "After what you just did, you need something stronger than whatever you were planning to order." He wasn't wrong. My hands were still shaking, my adrenaline still spiking and crashing in waves that made me feel simultaneously invincible and like I might throw up. When the bartender set 2 heavy tumblers of clear liquid in front of us, I picked mine up with both hands to keep it steady. "Na zdrowie," Adrian said, raising his glass. To revenge poorly planned but well executed. Despite everything, I laughed. A real laugh this time, not the shaky, uncertain sound from before. We clinked glasses, and I threw back the vodka in one swallow, the way I'd seen my Uncle Sal do at family weddings, feeling it burn down my throat and settle like fire in my stomach. "Better," Adrian observed, and when I looked at him, there was the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, softening the hard edges of his face. "Now you look less like you might faint." "I wasn't going to faint," I protested, but my voice lacked conviction. "I was just processing. He repeated the word like he was testing it, his accent making it sound foreign and somehow more honest. "You Americans, you have such polite words for strong emotions. In Russia, we would say you were D341, NFDUD-D34 from anger." "What does that mean?" "That you were fucked by anger." His translation was blunt, delivered with the same casualness as discussing the weather, and it startled another laugh out of me, this one louder, more genuine, drawing attention from nearby patrons. "Yeah," I admitted, setting my glass down and running my fingers through my hair, dislodging strands from my carefully constructed ponytail. "Yeah, that's exactly what I was." Adrian's eyes followed the movement of my hand, tracking the way my hair fell around my shoulders, and something in his expression shifted, intensified. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he wants, and the recognition of that desire sent a thrill of fear and excitement through me in equal measure. Tell me about him, Adrian said, nodding toward where Trevor still sat, though his voice suggested he didn't particularly care about the answer. This fool who lost you. And maybe it was the vodka warming my blood, or the lingering taste of Adrian's kiss on my lips, or the way his mere presence had made Trevor, arrogant, entitled, Trevor, back down like a scolded puppy, but I found myself telling him. About the 5 years together, about the first betrayal I'd forgiven, about the second one that had broken something in me I wasn't sure could be fixed, about Harper, who'd been my roommate freshman year of college, who'd held my hair when I got food poisoning from bad sushi, who'd apparently been fucking my boyfriend for months before I walked in on them. Adrian listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail, his hands curling into fists on the bar before deliberately unclenching them. When I finished, there was a long moment of silence broken only by the ambient noise of the bar. Conversations I couldn't quite make out. The clink of glasses, the bass line of music that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. He is lucky, Adrian finally said, his voice so low I had to lean closer to hear him, that you asked me to kiss you instead of hurt him. Because if you had asked for the latter, Malaya, I would have obliged. The certainty in his words, the absolute conviction that he would have committed violence on my behalf after knowing me for less than 20 minutes, should have terrified me. Instead, it made me feel something I hadn't felt since before the first betrayal, valued, protected, like I mattered enough for someone to get angry on my behalf. Why would you do that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You don't even know me. His hand came up to cup my face again, the same gesture he'd made before kissing me, his palm warm against my cheek, his thumb brushing across my lower lip with a gentleness that contradicted every other hard edge about him. Because, he said, his gray eyes holding mine with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. Any man who would waste what he had with you deserves to know fear. And I am very good at teaching that lesson. Adrian's hand was still cradling my face when my phone buzzed in my purse, shattering the moment like dropped glass. I fumbled for it, my fingers clumsy from the vodka and adrenaline, and saw Trevor's name lighting up the screen. Of course he couldn't let me have this, couldn't let me walk away with even a shred of dignity. We need to talk. Now. I showed the screen to Adrian, watching his expression darken as he read the message. His jaw tightened again, that small muscle jumping, and he took my phone from my hand with a deliberateness that suggested he was controlling an impulse to throw it across the room. Block him, Adrian said simply, his accent thickening with barely suppressed anger. This man has nothing to say that you need to hear. I can't just... I started, but even as I said it, I realized how ridiculous I sounded. Why couldn't I? What did I owe Trevor except the satisfaction of telling him to fuck off one final time? My phone buzzed again, and again. Trevor was calling now, and I could see over Adrian's shoulder that Trevor had stood up from his booth, was actually walking toward us with that determined stride that I knew meant he was about to make a scene. Harper trailed behind him, her expression caught between concern and barely concealed glee. She always had loved drama, as long as she wasn't the one being humiliated. Camilla, can we talk outside? Trevor's voice carried that placating tone he used when he was trying to manipulate me back into compliance. Just for a minute. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Adrian's body had gone completely still beside me, and I realized with a jolt of fear, not for me, but for Trevor, that this stranger I'd kissed was debating whether to simply remove Trevor from my presence by force. His hand had moved from my face to rest casually on the bar, but I could see the tension in his forearm, the way his fingers curled slightly. Ready. There's no misunderstanding, Trevor, I said, forcing my voice to stay level even as my heart hammered. We're done. We've been done for months. Me kissing someone else shouldn't come as a surprise. You certainly didn't have any problem doing the same while we were still together. That's different, Trevor shot back. And God, the audacity of this man. I made mistakes, yes, but at least I wasn't out here throwing myself at strangers in bars like some. He didn't get to finish the sentence. Adrian moved faster than someone his size should have been able to, stepping between me and Trevor with a fluid grace that suggested violence was a language he spoke fluently. He didn't touch Trevor. Didn't need to. His mere presence was enough to make Trevor stumble backward, nearly colliding with Harper. "You will leave," Adrian said, and his voice had dropped to something cold and deadly, each word enunciated with careful precision. "Now. And you will not contact her again. Do you understand?" "Who the fuck are you?" Trevor demanded, but his voice cracked slightly, betraying his fear. "Her bodyguard? This is between me and Camilla, so why don't you mind your own?" "She is my concern now." Adrian's interruption was absolute, final. "Which makes you my concern as well. And trust me, Mudak, you do not want my attention." I didn't know what the Russian word meant, but from the way Trevor's face flushed, and several nearby patrons who were clearly Eastern European heritage hid smiles behind their drinks, I could guess it wasn't complimentary. Harper grabbed Trevor's arm, actually physically pulling him backward, her eyes wide with a fear that I'd never seen on her usually confident face. "Trevor, let's just go," she hissed, her voice urgent. "This isn't worth it." "Listen to your friend," Adrian suggested, though friend came out sounding like an insult. She, at least, has sense of self-preservation. I watched, almost in a daze, as Trevor allowed himself to be dragged back toward their booth, his friends already gathering their things with the kind of hasty efficiency that suggested they all wanted to be anywhere but here. Trevor kept looking back over his shoulder, his expression cycling through anger, confusion, and something that looked almost like concern. Though, whether for me or for himself, I couldn't tell. Within 5 minutes, their entire group had cleared out, leaving behind half-finished drinks and a few $20 bills thrown carelessly on the table. The bartender caught my eye and gave me a small, approving nod, like I'd just passed some test I hadn't known I was taking. "You didn't have to do that," I said to Adrian, though my voice lacked conviction. The truth was, watching Trevor back down, watching him finally understand that his charm and privilege and entitled anger didn't work on everyone, it felt better than the kiss had. Almost. "Yes, I did." Adrian turned back to face me, and his expression had softened marginally, the dangerous edge receding to something almost gentle. Men like him, they need to be taught that their actions have consequences, that they cannot continue to hurt without eventually meeting something that bites back. The way he said it, the absolute certainty in his voice, made me wonder again what exactly Adrian Markov did for a living. The expensive clothes, the watch I'd noticed earlier, a Patek Philippe, I realized now that I was paying attention. The way everyone in the bar seemed to give him a wide berth, even before the confrontation with Trevor. This was not a man who worked a 9-to-5 in an office. "You're not just a businessman, are you?" I asked, the vodka making me bolder than I probably should have been. Adrian's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. "No, Malaya, I am not. Does that frighten you?" It should have. Every self-preservation instinct I had should have been screaming at me to thank him for his help and get as far away as possible. But when I looked into those gray eyes, I didn't feel fear. I felt curiosity, attraction, and something else I couldn't quite name, but that felt dangerously close to safety. "Should it?" I countered. "Perhaps." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my neck for just a moment before dropping away. "But I think you already know that I would never hurt you. You have good instincts, Camila Barisi. They are what let you survive a fool like Trevor for so long." My last name in his accented voice did something to me, made my Italian heritage feel less like something I'd been running from, and more like something precious he was acknowledging. My family had always been loud, passionate, protective to the point of smothering. Traits I'd tried to downplay when I was with Trevor and his buttoned-up wasp family, who thought emotions were something to be managed rather than felt. My Nana always said I had my grandfather's stubbornness, I said, surprised to find myself smiling at the memory. He came over from Sicily with nothing but a suitcase and a temper, built a life here through sheer force of will. And what did he build? Adrian asked, seeming genuinely interested. A bakery in Astoria. It's still there, run by my uncle now. Best cannoli in Queens. Pride crept into my voice despite my best efforts to sound casual. Growing up, I spent every Saturday there, learning to make the shells the way my nonna taught me, listening to the old men argue about soccer and politics in Sicilian while they drank espresso. You miss it? It wasn't a question. Yeah, I admitted, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest like a weight. Trevor hated going there, said it was too loud, too crowded, that his clothes always smelled like flour afterward. So I stopped going as often, and then when we broke up, I felt too ashamed to show my face, like I'd somehow failed by letting him. I cut myself off, blinking against the sudden burning in my eyes. Adrian's hand found mine where it rested on the bar, his fingers threading through mine with surprising gentleness. You failed nothing, he said firmly. He failed you. There is a difference. The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, broke something open inside me. Tears I'd been holding back for months suddenly threatened to spill over, and I pressed my free hand against my mouth, trying to hold it together. I would not cry in front of this stranger, no matter how kind he was being, no matter how much his words felt like absolution I didn't know I needed. Come, Adrian said, releasing my hand to pull out his phone. I am taking you home. You have had enough of this place. You don't have to... I started, but he was already typing something, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. My driver will be here in 5 minutes, he said, pocketing his phone and returning his attention to me. And yes, I do have to. You asked me to kiss you, which makes you my responsibility now. That's not how that works, I protested, but there was no heat in it. The truth was, I didn't want to take the subway home alone, didn't want to sit in my empty studio apartment replaying the night over and over. And the idea of spending a little more time with Adrian Markov, this stranger who'd turned my revenge plan into something more complicated, it was tempting enough to ignore common sense. In my world, it is exactly how it works, Adrian replied. You put yourself under my protection when you grabbed my shirt and demanded I help you hurt your ex, whether you knew it or not. And what world is that exactly? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Those gray eyes held mine, and for a moment I saw something in them that should have terrified me, something cold and calculating and completely merciless. But then he smiled, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger, almost boyish despite the scars and the hard edges. The kind where people do not forget favors or insults, he said simply. But you do not need to worry about that tonight, Malaya. Tonight, you are just a woman who had a bad evening and needed someone to lean on. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up outside the bar's front window, and Adrian stood, offering me his hand. I took it, letting him help me off the bar stool, and felt his arm slide around my waist. Not possessive like Trevor used to do, but supportive, like he was making sure I didn't fall. As we walked toward the door, I caught my reflection in the mirror behind the bar. My mascara was slightly smudged, my lipstick kissed off, my hair falling out of its ponytail in waves around my shoulders. I looked like I'd been through a war and come out the other side, not unscathed, but alive. Standing next to Adrian, his massive frame dwarfing mine, I looked small and protected, and somehow more myself than I had in months. The night air hit me like a slap after the warmth of the bar, and I shivered in my thin dress. Before I could even process the cold, Adrian had shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over my shoulders. It was huge on me, the sleeves hanging past my hands, and it smelled like him. That woodsy cologne mixed with something uniquely masculine that made me want to bury my face in it and breathe deep. The driver, a serious-looking man with graying hair and the same watchful eyes as Adrian, opened the back door without a word. I slid across the leather seat, and Adrian followed, maintaining that same careful distance that suggested respect rather than disinterest. "Where do you live?" he asked, as the car pulled smoothly into Manhattan traffic. I gave him my address in Astoria, watching his expression for any judgment about my decidedly unglamorous neighborhood. There was none, just a slight nod as he relayed the information to the driver in rapid Russian. "Tell me," Adrian said, turning to face me as we merged onto the 59th Street Bridge, the city lights reflecting off the East River below us. "What did you think would happen when you asked me to kiss you?" Honestly, I laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "I thought you'd either tell me to fuck off, or at best give me a quick peck on the lips so Trevor would see. I definitely didn't expect." I gestured vaguely between us, at the jacket around my shoulders, at the fact that I was currently in his car, being driven home like some kind of princess in a very dark fairy tale. "What we shared was not a quick peck," Adrian said, and there was heat in his voice that made my stomach flip. "That was a kiss meant to brand, to claim, to make every man in that bar understand that you are under my protection now." "I don't need protection," I said, but even I could hear how weak it sounded. "Everyone needs protection, Malaya," Adrian replied, his hand finding mine in the darkness of the back seat. "The only question is whether they are wise enough to accept it when it is offered." We drove in silence through Queens, passing neighborhoods I'd known my entire life. The 24-hour diners on Queens Boulevard, the Orthodox Jewish communities of Forest Hills with their dark coats and wide-brimmed hats, the gradual shift into Astoria with its mix of Greek restaurants and hipster coffee shops. Everything looked different through the tinted windows of Adrian's Mercedes, like I was watching my own life from a distance. "This is me," I said as we pulled up in front of my building, a pre-war walk-up with a crooked awning and a front door that stuck in humid weather. Next to Adrian's obvious wealth, it looked even shabbier than usual, and I felt a flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. But Adrian just nodded, already opening his door and coming around to help me out. His hand was warm and solid in mine as I stepped onto the sidewalk, my heels clicking against concrete that needed repaving. The September air had taken on that crisp quality that promised fall was coming, and I pulled his jacket tighter around myself, reluctant to give it back. "I can walk you up," Adrian offered, and there was something in his tone that made it clear he wasn't asking permission. "My apartment is a mess," I warned, already pulling out my keys. "And it's small, really small, like Trevor used to complain that my bathroom was smaller than his closet." "Trevor is a Snobistический durack," Adrian said, following me toward the entrance. "Which means snobbish fool." His lips quirked. "Among other things." I led him up 3 flights of stairs, very aware of his presence behind me, the way his expensive shoes made no sound on the worn treads, how he had to duck slightly under the low ceiling on the landing. My door was at the end of a narrow hallway that smelled perpetually of Mrs. Chen's cooking from apartment 3C. Tonight, some combination of garlic and ginger that actually made my stomach growl. "When did you last eat?" Adrian asked, apparently hearing the sound. "Lunch, I think." I fumbled with the lock, which always stuck. I was too nervous about seeing Trevor to have dinner. The lock finally gave, and I pushed open the door to my apartment, cringing slightly at what I knew he'd see. The Murphy bed I pulled down from the wall because there wasn't room for a proper bedroom, the tiny kitchenette with its ancient appliances, the single window that looked out onto a brick wall, the stack of unpaid bills on my makeshift dining table that I kept meaning to deal with but couldn't quite face. But Adrian didn't seem to notice any of it. He was focused on a different detail. The framed photograph on my only shelf, the one of me and my Nana in front of her bakery, both of us covered in flour and laughing at something my uncle had said. I was maybe 10 in that picture, still young enough to believe that good people won and hard work was always rewarded. "She looks like you," Adrian observed, moving closer to examine the photo. "Same nose, same smile." "Everyone says I have the Baresi face," I said, slipping off my heels and immediately feeling more grounded being closer to my actual height. "My nonna used to say it was a gift, being able to see your ancestors in the mirror every morning, that it meant we carried them with us wherever we went." Adrian turned from the photo, his gray eyes finding mine across my tiny apartment. "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. Past tense, because Nonna had died 2 years ago, and I'd been so consumed with Trevor and trying to make our relationship work that I'd missed her last few weeks, had been too busy at his company holiday party to visit her in the hospital. The guilt of that still sat in my chest like a stone. She would have hated Trevor, would have seen right through him from the start. "But you loved him anyway." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. I thought I did. I moved to my kitchenette, needing something to do with my hands. Now I think maybe I just loved the idea of being loved, you know? Of having someone choose me, even if the someone was all wrong. Adrian's jacket was still around my shoulders, and I started to shrug it off, but he stopped me with a gesture. "Keep it. You are still cold." I should probably give it back. "Keep it," he repeated more firmly this time. "Consider it a gift for your bravery tonight." I wanted to argue, but the truth was I liked wearing it. Liked having this physical reminder that the evening had been real, that this impossibly attractive stranger had kissed me like he meant it, and then threatened Trevor on my behalf without asking for anything in return. "Are you hungry?" I asked, gesturing vaguely at my nearly empty fridge. "I don't have much, but I could make—" "When did you last have a proper meal?" Adrian interrupted, and there was concern in his voice that made my throat tight. "One that you sat down and enjoyed, not something eaten standing at a counter between shifts." I couldn't actually remember. Between working my administrative job at a medical supplies company and picking up weekend shifts at my uncle's bakery to make rent, I'd been existing mostly on coffee and whatever my mother sent home with me when I managed to make it to Sunday dinner. "That's what I thought," Adrian said when I didn't answer. He pulled out his phone. "I am ordering food. What do you like?" "You don't have to." "What do you like, Camila?" The question was gentle, but firm, and I realized he wasn't going to take no for an answer. "Italian," I admitted. Real Italian, not the Americanized stuff. My nonna would rise from her grave if she knew I'd been living on Olive Garden takeout. Adrian's fingers flew across his phone screen, speaking quietly in Russian to whoever answered his call. When he hung up, he said, "Food will be here in 30 minutes. Now, show me where you keep your alcohol so I can make us something while we wait." "I don't really drink," I protested, though I obediently went to the cabinet above my stove, where I kept the bottle of Chianti someone had given me last Christmas. "And I definitely don't have whatever fancy vodka you probably usually—" I stopped, because Adrian was laughing. Actually laughing. A deep, rich sound that transformed his entire face and made him look years younger. "You think I only drink expensive vodka?" "Milaya. I grew up in Novosibirsk, in an apartment smaller than this one, with parents who worked 3 jobs between them to keep food on the table. I have drunk things that would horrify your American sensibilities." The revelation surprised me. Everything about him screamed wealth, from his clothes to his car to the way he moved through the world with absolute certainty of his place in it. But I heard the truth in his voice, the edge of something hard-earned rather than inherited. "How did you end up here?" I asked, pulling down 2 mismatched glasses, the only two I owned that weren't chipped. That is a story for another time. Adrian accepted the glasses and the wine, opening the bottle with the corkscrew I dug out of my junk drawer. Tonight is about you, not me. He poured the wine with the same fluid grace he did everything, handing me a glass and tapping his against it gently. Za tvoje zdorovje. To your health, Camilla Barisi, and to the end of foolish men who do not deserve you. I drank, letting the wine warm my throat and settle some of the chaos still churning in my stomach. Adrian moved around my apartment like he belonged there, examining the few personal items I'd put out. More photographs of my family, a rosary my Nana had given me before she died, the stack of half-read books on my coffee table that I kept meaning to finish. You like mystery novels, he observed, picking up the latest one. Something about a murder in a small Italian village. Escapism, I admitted. It's nice to read about other people's problems for a while. Adrian set down the book and turned to face me, his expression serious. I should tell you something, Camilla, before this goes any further. My heart jumped. This. Us, he clarified, moving closer until he was standing just a foot away, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. What I said at the bar, about you being under my protection, I was not speaking casually. In my world, such statements carry weight. What world is that, exactly? I asked, though I'd spent the car ride Googling his name and had found enough scattered references, always vague, always careful, to have a pretty good idea. One that you have been fortunate enough to avoid until tonight, Adrian said. But now that we have met, now that I have claimed you publicly. Claimed me? I repeated, my Italian temper flaring despite the wine and the attraction and the bone-deep exhaustion of the evening. I'm not a piece of territory, Adrian. No, he agreed. And one hand came up to cup my face the way he had at the bar, his thumb tracing my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. You are a woman who deserves better than anything you have been given, and I find myself wanting to be the one to give it to you. The honesty in his words, the raw vulnerability beneath the controlled exterior, made me sway toward him like he was magnetic north, and I was a compass that had finally found its direction. You don't even know me. I know enough. His other hand settled on my waist, pulling me infinitesimally closer. I know you are brave enough to demand what you need from strangers. I know you are loyal enough to forgive a man who did not deserve it. I know you are strong enough to walk away when you finally understood your worth. His gray eyes burned into mine. And I know that when I kissed you, I felt something I have not felt in years, something I want to feel again. Adrian. I breathed his name, not sure if I was protesting or encouraging. The knock on my door shattered the moment, the food arriving exactly when he'd said it would. Adrian released me with obvious reluctance, and I tried to calm my racing heart as he handled the delivery, tipping the person generously enough that I heard a surprised, "Thank you, sir," before the door closed. He'd ordered enough food for 6 people, pasta carbonara, chicken saltimbocca, fresh bread with olive oil and balsamic, caprese salad with mozzarella that smelled like it had been made that morning, and a tiramisu that looked too pretty to eat. The scent filled my tiny apartment, making my mouth water and reminding me that I'd been running on empty for longer than just tonight. Sit, Adrian commanded, and I was too overwhelmed to argue. He served me like it was the most natural thing in the world, plating the food with surprising skill, making sure I had everything I needed before serving himself a smaller portion, and settling across from me at my tiny table. We ate in comfortable silence, and I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't with anyone, not Trevor, not even my family, in months. There was something about Adrian's presence that made me feel safe to just exist, to eat without worrying about table manners or making conversation or being entertaining. Better, he observed after I'd finished my second helping of pasta. You have color in your face now. You were too pale at the bar. I was having an adrenaline crash, I admitted. And probably a minor panic attack. I don't usually. Tonight was very unlike me. Good, Adrian said, surprising me. You should not have to be usual, Camilla. You should be extraordinary, and the world should adjust to accommodate you, not the other way around. The conviction in his voice made me believe it, at least for a moment. Is that how your world works? That is how I make it work, he corrected. Power is not something you are given. It is something you take, and then you use it to protect what matters. And what matters to you? I asked, genuinely curious. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in his glass. Less than it should, he finally said. I have spent many years building an empire, securing my position, ensuring that no one could ever make me feel as powerless as I once felt. But empires are cold things, Camilla. They do not keep you warm at night. The loneliness in his admission made my chest ache. Is that why you helped me? Because you recognized something in me? Perhaps. He set down his glass and reached across the table to take my hand. Or perhaps I simply saw a beautiful woman being disrespected and decided that her ex-boyfriend needed to be taught a lesson about consequences. By kissing me senseless in front of him? Adrian's smile was slow, predatory. Among other things. My phone buzzed on the table between us. Trevor again, because of course, he couldn't leave it alone. Adrian picked it up before I could, his expression darkening as he read whatever message Trevor had sent. He says you made a fool of yourself, Adrian reported, his voice dangerously soft. That you should call him tomorrow when you are sober and ready to apologize for embarrassing him in front of his friends. The audacity of it made me laugh, a sound with sharp edges. Of course he does. In Trevor's world, I'm always the one who needs to apologize. Adrian's thumb moved across my phone screen, and I realized he was typing something. What are you... Correcting a misconception, he said, finishing with a decisive tap before setting my phone face down on the table. There. He will not bother you again. Adrian, what did you send him? Those gray eyes met mine, and there was something almost violent in them, something that reminded me that this man was dangerous for reasons that had nothing to do with his money or his power. I told him that if he contacts you again, he will discover exactly how much I dislike men who disrespect women I have claimed as mine. I haven't agreed to be yours, I pointed out, though my protest was half-hearted at best. Not yet, Adrian agreed, his hand still holding mine across the table. But you will. I woke up on my Murphy bed fully clothed, Adrian's jacket still draped over me like a blanket. Sunlight streamed through my single window, and I could hear the sounds of Saturday morning in Astoria. The Greek bakery downstairs opening up, kids playing in the street, Mrs. Chen's TV playing her morning soap operas at volume that suggested she'd turned off her hearing aids again. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd dreamed the entire night. But then I smelled coffee. Real coffee. Not the instant kind I usually made. And heard movement in my kitchenette. I sat up, my head fuzzy with wine and emotional exhaustion, to find Adrian standing at my stove, somehow making breakfast in my tiny kitchen like he'd been doing it his entire life. You stayed, I said, my voice rough with sleep. He turned, and even in the harsh morning light streaming through my window, he was devastating. He'd rolled up the sleeves of his black shirt, revealing forearms corded with muscle and dusted with dark hair. His jaw was shadowed with morning stubble, and his gray eyes were softer than they'd been at the bar, almost gentle as they took in my rumpled appearance. I slept on your couch, he said, gesturing to my second-hand sofa that was at least a foot too short for his frame. You fell asleep during dessert, and I did not feel comfortable leaving you alone after the evening you had. I remembered vaguely, the wine, the exhaustion, Adrian carrying me the 3 steps from my table to my bed, while I protested sleepily that I could walk. He'd removed my shoes with surprising gentleness, pulled a blanket over me, and I'd been asleep before he'd even left the room. "You should have woken me up," I said, embarrassment heating my cheeks. "You didn't need to stay." "Yes, I did." He returned his attention to whatever he was cooking. Eggs, from the smell of it. And was that bacon? Where had he even gotten bacon? "You asked me to kiss you, which made you my responsibility. I take my responsibilities seriously, Malaya." I stood, stretching muscles that ached from tension and too many emotions, and padded over to my kitchenette in my bare feet. Adrian had somehow found my French press that I never used because it seemed too complicated for one person, and had brewed coffee that smelled like heaven. He'd also, apparently, run to the bodega on the corner because there were fresh bagels on my counter, along with cream cheese, lox, and the bacon currently sizzling in my pan. "How long have you been awake?" I asked, accepting the mug of coffee he handed me. "A few hours." He flipped the bacon with more skill than any criminal had a right to possess. "I am used to early mornings, and your neighborhood is charming at dawn. I watched an old woman yell at a parking meter in what I believe was Greek for 10 minutes. Despite everything, I laughed. That would be Mrs. Papadopoulos from 2A. She thinks all technology is a personal affront from God." Adrian smiled, and it struck me again how that expression transformed him, softening all his hard edges. "Sit. Breakfast is almost ready." I sat at my tiny table, watching him move around my kitchen with surprising ease. It felt surreal, domestic in a way that should have been uncomfortable with a virtual stranger but somehow wasn't. Adrian served us both. Perfectly cooked eggs, crispy bacon, a bagel with cream cheese and lox for me because "you need to eat, you are too thin," and settled across from me with his own plate. "I should probably thank you," I said, spreading cream cheese with careful precision, "for not taking advantage of me last night. I was pretty drunk and emotional, and you could have—" "No," Adrian interrupted, his voice hard. "I could not have. You were vulnerable, and I am many things, Camilla, but I do not take what is not freely offered." His eyes met mine. "When you come to my bed, and you will be completely sober and absolutely certain of what you are choosing." The conviction in his words, the absolute certainty that I would eventually come to his bed, should have offended me. Instead, it sent a thrill of anticipation through me that I immediately tried to suppress. "Pretty sure of yourself," I observed, taking a bite of my bagel to hide my reaction. "I am sure of what I see between us." He leaned back in his chair, his gray eyes never leaving mine. "You felt it too at the bar. The connection, the chemistry, the way your body responded to mine when we kissed. That was just... Do not diminish what we shared, Malaya." His voice was gentle but firm. "You asked a stranger to kiss you, and instead of giving you something perfunctory, I gave you passion. Because the moment my lips touched yours, I knew you deserved nothing less." My phone buzzed on the table, and we both glanced at it. Not Trevor this time. My mother, texting to remind me about Sunday dinner tomorrow, adding in all caps that I better not cancel again. Camilla Francesca Baresi, invoking my full name like she used to when I was a child and in trouble. "Your family is close," Adrian observed. It wasn't a question. "Extremely. My mother texts me at least 5 times a day. My uncle calls every time I miss Sunday dinner. And my cousins have a group chat that blows up my phone constantly with memes and arguments about who makes the best meatballs." I smiled despite myself. "It's overwhelming sometimes, but I wouldn't change it. You are lucky." Something in Adrian's voice made me look up, catching a flash of pain before he controlled it. "I have no one left except the men who work for me, and that is not the same as family." The loneliness in his admission made me bold. "What happened to them? Your family?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on my cheap laminate table. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral, emptied of emotion. My parents died when I was 16. A fire in our apartment building that the landlord had been warned about for months, but did nothing to fix. My sister was already married, living in America with her husband. I came here to be near her, to start over. Where is she now? I asked gently. Dead. 5 years ago. His jaw tightened. Her husband was involved with people he should not have been involved with, owed debts he could not pay. They came for him, and she was collateral damage. Their daughter, my niece, she was only 8 when it happened. Oh God, Adrian. I reached across the table without thinking, my hand covering his. I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago, he said, but his hand turned over to grip mine with almost painful intensity. It is why I do what I do now, why I built what I built, so that no one I care about will ever be helpless again, will ever be hurt because they lacked power or protection. I understood then, the empire he'd mentioned, the danger that surrounded him, the way everyone at the bar had seemed to fear him. This was a man who'd been forged in loss, who'd turned his grief into power and his pain into protection for those he deemed worthy of it. Your niece? I asked quietly. Safe, in boarding school in Switzerland, with a trust fund that will ensure she never wants for anything. His eyes met mine. She is the only blood family I have left, and I will do anything, to make sure she lives the life her parents would have wanted for her. The fierce protectiveness in his voice called to something in me, something Italian and family-oriented, and deeply understanding of the lengths people went to for those they loved. That's why you helped me last night, because you understand what it's like to feel powerless. Perhaps. His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand. Or perhaps I just saw a beautiful woman who needed someone to stand with her, and I wanted to be that person. My phone buzzed again, this time Trevor, despite Adrian's warning last night. I picked it up to delete the message without reading it, but Adrian's hand shot out, taking the phone from me with a speed that suggested violence was always just beneath his controlled surface. What did I tell him? Adrian's voice had gone cold, dangerous, as he read Trevor's message. Whatever it said made that muscle in his jaw jump, and he stood abruptly, moving to the window where morning light made him look carved from marble. This fool has a death wish. What did he say? I asked, standing to join him. Adrian showed me the screen, and I read Trevor's words with a mixture of disbelief and anger. Tell your Russian thug that I know people too. That little stunt last night is going to cost him. And you're going to regret embarrassing me in front of my colleagues, Cammy. You always were too stupid to know when you were protected. I need to make a phone call, Adrian said, already pulling out his own phone. Stay here. Do not leave this apartment until I return. Wait, what are you going to do? Panic fluttered in my chest at the sudden shift in his demeanor, the way his entire body had gone tense with controlled violence. I am going to teach Trevor Ashford what happens when men threaten what is mine. Adrian's gray eyes were cold now, empty of the warmth I'd seen during breakfast. And then I am going to ensure that he never has the opportunity to threaten you again. Adrian, you can't just... I started, but he was already speaking rapidly in Russian into his phone, his free hand running through his hair in the first sign of agitation I'd seen from him. When he hung up, he turned to me, his expression softening marginally. Camilla, listen to me very carefully. Trevor does not know who I am, what I am, because I have been careful to keep my business separate from my public face. But his threat suggests he has connections to people who might recognize my name, which makes you a target by association. I don't understand, I said, though ice was beginning to form in my stomach. It means, Adrian said, moving close enough to cup my face in both hands, that I need to make arrangements for your safety. Starting now. I don't need... Yes, You do. His thumb brushed across my lower lip, and despite the fear creeping through me, I felt that same electric pull from the bar, the awareness of him that made everything else fade into background noise. Because I have decided that you are important to me, Camilla Baresi, and I protect what is important. The next hour passed in a blur of activity that felt like a tornado had touched down in my tiny apartment. Adrian made 3 more phone calls in rapid Russian, his voice alternating between commanding and coldly furious. A man named Dmitri arrived first, tall, scarred, with the same watchful eyes as Adrian, and began installing additional locks on my door, while explaining in broken English that these were better than police have, very secure, very safe. Then came Yuri, younger but no less intimidating, who set up what looked like a sophisticated security system around my single window, complete with sensors and a direct line to the network, whatever that meant. I sat on my bed couch, still wearing yesterday's dress and Adrian's jacket, watching my studio apartment transform into something resembling a safe house, while Adrian coordinated everything with the kind of efficiency that came from experience. "Is this really necessary?" I asked when there was a brief lull in activity. "Trevor's just a finance bro with an overinflated ego. He doesn't have actual connections to anything dangerous." Adrian's expression was grim as he sat beside me, the mattress dipping under his weight. "His father does. Robert Ashford is connected to the Costello family through his wife's brother. Do you know what that means?" I shook my head, though something in my stomach turned over at the name Costello. Even someone as removed from organized crime as me had heard that name whispered with a certain reverence in my uncle's bakery, where old men from the neighborhood would sometimes talk in low voices about the way things used to be. "It means," Adrian explained, his hand finding mine, "that Trevor has likely already complained to his father about what happened last night. And his father, wanting to protect his son's pride, may have made inquiries about the man who threatened Trevor, which means my name is now circulating in circles that I prefer to keep separate. Because you're—" I paused, not sure how to phrase it. "Because I am Bratva," Adrian said bluntly, using the Russian word I'd seen in my late-night Googling. "What you Americans call the Russian Mafia. I control certain operations in this city, and I have worked very hard to maintain a balance with the Italian families like the Costellos. Your ex-boyfriend, in his stupidity and arrogance, has now threatened that balance." The words should have terrified me, should have sent me running to pack a bag and disappear before I got any deeper into whatever this was. But instead, I found myself thinking about my family, my loud, protective, sometimes overwhelming family who would absolutely lose their minds if they knew I'd gotten involved with Russian organized crime. "I need to tell you something," I said, the words coming out before I could reconsider. "My family, they're not just bakers and small business owners. My grandfather, the one who came from Sicily, he had connections to people like the Costellos. My uncle took over the bakery, but there are cousins who went a different direction." Adrian's eyebrows rose slightly. "You are connected to the Italian families?" "Distantly. Very distantly." I pulled my hand from his, suddenly needing space to think. "My mother's brother, Uncle Sal. He's not just a baker. He's a cap regime in the Moretti family. I've never been involved in that side of things, kept my distance deliberately because I wanted a normal life. But if Trevor's father starts asking questions about me, if the Costellos start digging, they will discover that the woman I have claimed is connected to their rivals," Adrian finished, understanding dawning in his gray eyes. "Cazzo, this complicates things." The Italian curse sounded strange in his accented voice, and despite everything I almost smiled. "You speak Italian?" "Enough to conduct business." He stood, pacing my small space like a caged animal. "Camilla, I need to know, how close are you to this uncle? Would he come to your defense if he knew you were being threatened?" "Uncle Sal?" I thought about the man who'd bounced me on his knee as a child, who'd taught me to make perfect espresso, and who'd once broken a man's hand for getting too familiar with one of his teenage waitresses. He'd burned down half of Queens to protect me. But I've spent years trying to stay out of that world, trying to prove to my family that I didn't need their protection, that I could make it on my own. Pride, Adrian said. But there was understanding in his voice rather than judgment. I know that pride well. It is what drove me to build my own power rather than work within existing structures. But pride can also be dangerous, Malaya, especially when men like Trevor's father are involved. My phone rang. Not a text this time, but an actual call from my mother. I looked at Adrian, who nodded once, and I answered with a sense of inevitability settling over me. Camilla Francesca, where have you been? My mother's voice was a mixture of worry and anger, the familiar cadence of Sicilian accented English that I'd grown up with. Your Uncle Sal called me this morning, said some finance bastardo has been asking questions about you, about our family. What have you done? Mama, I can't explain. You better explain at dinner tomorrow, with whatever coglione you've gotten yourself involved with. She switched to rapid Italian that I only half understood, something about men and trouble, and why did her only daughter have to be so stubborn? Uncle Sal wants to meet him. Bring him tomorrow, 2:00, don't be late. Wear something nice. She hung up before I could protest, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. Adrian was watching me with an expression that might have been amusement if the situation wasn't so absurd. Your family knows, he observed. Apparently, Trevor's father reaching out to the Costellos set off alarms in the Italian community. I dropped my phone onto my table, suddenly exhausted despite having just woken up. My uncle wants to meet you, tomorrow, at Sunday dinner. Then I will meet him. Adrian said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. I have respect for the Italian families. If your uncle is reasonable, we can come to an understanding that protects you from the fallout of Trevor's idiocy. You don't understand, I said, fighting the hysterical laugh building in my throat. My family, Sunday dinner isn't just dinner. It's my mother, my father, 3 uncles, 2 aunts, 7 cousins, and whoever else happens to show up. It's chaos and noise and everyone talking over each other in 3 different languages, and they're going to grill you about your intentions and your background, and whether you go to church, and... Adrian's hands framed my face, his thumbs brushing away tears I hadn't realized were falling. Breathe, Camilla. I have faced worse than a large Italian family. I can handle Sunday dinner. But you don't understand what you're walking into, I insisted, my voice breaking. They're going to know what you are. They're going to know what you do. And they're going to blame me for bringing you into their world, for putting our family at risk. Then we will make them understand that I am the solution, not the risk. His gray eyes held mine with absolute certainty. Trevor Ashford made a mistake when he threatened you. He drew attention from people who would use you to get to me, or use me to get to your family. The only way to protect you now is to make it clear to everyone, Italian, Russian, and every other organization in this city, that you are under my protection, permanently. What does that mean? I whispered, though I thought I already knew. Adrian's answer was to kiss me, not like at the bar, not with the performative passion meant to hurt Trevor, but with a gentleness that made my chest ache. His lips moved against mine like he was memorizing the taste of me, his hands cradling my face like I was something precious rather than a complication he'd accidentally acquired. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between us. It means I am claiming you. Publicly, permanently, in a way that every organization in this city will understand and respect. You will be Bratva, under my protection, and anyone who threatens you threatens me. That's insane, I breathed, but I wasn't pulling away. We barely know each other. We met 12 hours ago because I asked you to kiss me to hurt my ex-boyfriend, We can't just... Can't we? Adrian pulled back just enough to meet my eyes. You say we barely know each other, but I know what matters. I know you are brave and loyal and willing to fight for what you believe in. I know you come from a family that values honor and protection. I know that when I kissed you, I felt something I have not felt since I was young enough to believe in things like fate. His thumb traced my lower lip. And I know that I will destroy anyone who tries to harm you, Camilla Baresi. That is not something I say lightly. This is crazy, I repeated, but my hands had fisted in his shirt again, holding him close rather than pushing him away. This is absolutely insane. Yes, Adrian agreed, and that rare, genuine smile transformed his face again. But sometimes insanity is the only logical response to an illogical situation. You asked me to kiss you, and I did. That simple act has now drawn both of us into a situation where the only path forward is together. So I am asking you, Camilla, will you trust me to protect you? Will you allow me to claim you in front of your family, in front of my organization, in front of this entire city if necessary? I thought about Trevor, about his threat, about the danger I'd accidentally brought down on myself by choosing the wrong stranger to kiss. I thought about my family, about Uncle Sal, and the world I'd spent years trying to avoid. I thought about my tiny apartment with its new locks and security system, about the way Adrian's men had moved through my space with quiet efficiency, about the fact that running was no longer an option because there was nowhere to run where either organization wouldn't eventually find me. But mostly, I thought about the way Adrian had looked at me in the bar, not with pity or lust, but with a fierce protectiveness that made me feel valued in a way Trevor never had. The way he'd listened to my story without judgment, the way he'd made me breakfast like it was the most natural thing in the world, the way his eyes softened when he looked at the photograph of me and my nonna. Okay, I heard myself say. Okay, but you're buying the cannoli. Adrian's laugh was surprised, genuine, and absolutely beautiful. He pulled me close, tucking my head under his chin, and I felt his heart beating steady and strong against my ear. I will buy all the cannoli you want, Malaya, for the rest of our lives, if that is what it takes. The next day, I walked into my mother's house in Howard Beach with Adrian at my side, his hand warm and possessive on the small of my back. The noise hit us first. My cousins arguing about the Yankees game playing in the living room, my mother and aunts shouting at each other in the kitchen, my father's booming laugh from somewhere deeper in the house. Uncle Sal was waiting in the dining room, and I knew immediately that this was a setup. He'd positioned himself like a king holding court, with two of my larger cousins flanking him in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. Adrian didn't even pause, just steered me forward with absolute confidence. Uncle Sal, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. This is Adrian Markov. My uncle's eyes, dark like mine, like my father's, like every Barisi for 3 generations, assessed Adrian with the kind of cold calculation I'd only seen at family funerals. Markov, the Russian who runs the waterfront operations out of Brighton Beach. Among other things, Adrian replied calmly, not intimidated by my uncle's tone or the muscle flanking him. And you are Salvatore Baresi, Capo Regime in the Moretti family. It is an honor to meet you. The formal acknowledgement seemed to surprise my uncle, and I saw his expression shift slightly, reassessing. My niece says Trevor Ashford's father has been making noise about her, says you're the reason. I am the reason Trevor Ashford learned what fear tastes like, Adrian corrected, his voice hard. Because he disrespected your niece in a public place, humiliated her, and threatened her when she chose to move on. His father's involvement is an unfortunate complication, but one I am prepared to handle. By claiming her as Bratva, Uncle Sal's voice was dangerous now. By making her a target for every organization that has issues with your operations. By making it clear that anyone who touches her dies screaming. Adrian's response was absolute, final, and I felt my uncle's men shift slightly, hands moving toward weapons I knew they carried. I do not make that threat lightly, Salvatore. I have killed for less than the honor of a woman I care for. I will go to war with the Costellos, with the commission itself if necessary, to ensure Camilla's safety. The room had gone completely silent. Even the noise from the rest of the house seemed to have faded, like everyone was holding their breath waiting for my uncle's response. Uncle Sal stood slowly, moving around the table with the kind of deliberate movement that suggested he was deciding whether this was going to end in violence or alliance. He stopped directly in front of Adrian, and they faced each other. Two men from different worlds, different organizations, united only by their connection to me. "You love her?" Uncle Sal asked bluntly. Adrian didn't hesitate. "I will." The answer was strange, honest, and somehow more powerful than a simple yes would have been. Uncle Sal stared at him for a long moment, then turned to me. "Camilla, you want this? You want to be with this man, knowing what he is, what it will mean for your life?" I looked at Adrian, at his gray eyes that had shown me both danger and tenderness, at the strong lines of his face that somehow felt more familiar than strange now, at the way his hand on my back never wavered, despite the threat of violence in the room. I thought about Trevor, about 5 wasted years with a man who'd never valued me, never protected me, never made me feel like I mattered beyond what I could do for him. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and certain. "I want this." Uncle Sal nodded once, then, shockingly, extended his hand to Adrian. "You keep her safe, Russian. You treat her with the respect a Barisi woman deserves. And you remember that if you hurt her, there is no place in this world or the next where my family will not find you." Adrian took his hand, the grip between them firm. "On my life and my organization's honor, she will be cherished. This I swear." The tension broke like a popped balloon, and suddenly the house was alive again. My mother rushing in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron and demanding to know why no one told her we'd arrived. My cousins crowding around to get a look at the Russian who'd somehow won Uncle Sal's approval. My father appearing with wine glasses and a bottle of Chianti from the cellar. Through it all, Adrian stayed at my side, his presence solid and unwavering. He charmed my mother by complimenting her cooking in broken but earnest Italian, bonded with my father over a shared love of soccer, even managed to make my usually hostile cousins laugh with a story about his first winter in Siberia. As the afternoon stretched into evening, as the meal turned into dessert, and dessert turned into espresso and amaretto, I found myself watching Adrian interact with my family with a mixture of disbelief and something that felt dangerously close to falling. He fit here in a way Trevor never had, understanding the importance of family, of loyalty, of the unspoken rules that governed both our worlds. "You did good, Piccola," Uncle Sal said quietly, appearing at my elbow while Adrian was being interrogated by my aunt about whether he wanted children. "That is a dangerous man, but a good one. He will protect you." "I know," I said, watching Adrian's gray eyes find mine across the room, his smile just for me, warm and real and devastating. "Good." Uncle Sal squeezed my shoulder. "Because he was right. If Trevor Ashford or his father makes another move, it will be their last. Nobody threatens a Barisi. Not anymore." Later, as Adrian's driver took us back to my apartment, which I'd already been told was temporary, Adrian was having me moved to a more secure location by the end of the week. I leaned against his shoulder, exhausted and overwhelmed, and somehow happy. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for not running when you saw how crazy my family is." Adrian's arm came around me, pulling me closer. "They are not crazy. They are protective, which is how family should be. And they love you very much, which makes them wise. You're still buying the cannoli, I said, smiling against his shoulder. I already ordered a standing delivery from your uncle's bakery, Adrian replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Every Sunday morning, fresh cannoli. It seemed the least I could do for the woman who changed my entire life by asking me to kiss her. I tilted my head up to look at him, finding those gray eyes already on me, dark with promises I was only beginning to understand. Is that what I did? Yes, Malaya. He kissed me then, soft and sweet, and full of something that felt like the beginning of a story neither of us had planned, but both of us were choosing. That is exactly what you did.